Welcome to this cityscape watercolour painting using a plastic card. This extended tutorial will include lots of those yummy techniques that I know lots of you love, and that's, using the card, using some pastels and actually painting people and buildings and trying to make it easy and accessible even if you've only started out in watercolour a short while ago. So I hope it really inspires you to have a go. For a full list of all the materials I use in this demonstration, check out the description below. You'll also find a link for the photo if you'd like to paint along with that. I don't actually use my palette knife, just to let you know, but I do use these gorgeous pastels by Sennelier, and they are the soft pastels. They're like posh chalks. So I'm using my large flathead soft brush to wet all of the sky area. So I'm just carefully going around Big Ben here. This is a walk that I used to do years ago across Westminster Bridge. I used to work along the Strand many years ago. So it sort of brings back some memories here. You get some gorgeous views from this bridge as well. But it's such an iconic view and I couldn't resist painting it. I just want to ease your mind to say, I'm going to take you through this process really gently. I'm going to hold your hand all the way through it. So for those of you on Patreon, you can actually get a downloadable sketch of this drawing as well. So I hope you find that helpful. I'm just mixing up now some cerulean. Okay, you can use cobalt blue if you don't have any cerulean, or just a light blue, and I'm just making a big puddle of paint. I've really thoroughly soaked my paper. I normally say mix the colours first and then wet the paper, because it was just one colour. I just thought I'll take a chance. So I'm just using my large round brush and I'm painting the sky area with this gorgeous colour. Don't worry about going over some of the lamps or darker areas. Just be careful going over the Big Ben, because it's almost like the focal point there. I've just diluted the wash a little as I go towards the horizon, just to make the sky a little bit lighter, and it gives a little bit of depth because it's lighter in tone, so it looks further away. And just to say, you can leave little patches, little gaps where the clouds are. And I'm going to do a little bit of lifting off to show you some techniques of lifting off and using paper towel to take off the paint as well. It's quite nice to vary the lifting off. So I'm actually leaving gaps for the clouds. That's quite nice. You get lovely soft edges. It's also quite nice to lift off with a brush and paper towels, because you get these different sort of edges that you can get with clouds as well. So I'm carefully going around the edge there of Big Ben, taking my time. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I love painting skies, and remember, if it all goes wrong, just put it under the tap, wash it off and have another go. It's fine. It's always good actually with skies, less risk with a sky. So I'm just sort of tilting here just to get all the paint sort of blending and sort of, creating sort of nice atmospheric effect, and just waiting for some magic to happen. Sometimes it's amazing when you tilt, and you even I've watched beginners for years, and they've got these amazing skies. I'm like, oh, I wish my sky had gone that way. It's just magical. So what I'm doing now is I'm lifting off paint using my brush. So I'm wetting the brush, cleaning the brush rather, wiping the excess off on the paper towel, then lifting off the paint and repeating that process, so you keep the brush nice and clean, so you try and take off the paint. Sometimes it resists a little bit, so you just keep working at it, and because the brushes are soft, it won't hurt the paper. So you can do as much of this as you like. I'm showing you the technique, but your skies will look slightly different to mine. Now, if I did this again, I promise you my sky would look different as well. It's because we're working with a wet medium. This is what happens. So I always say, go with the flow. So I'm using the paper towel now to lift off, just gently sort of tapping the paper, trying to vary the marks and not pressing too hard as well. And what I would advise, sometimes you can actually use a damp little bit of paper towel as well. That works slightly well, not slightly well, but in a slightly different way. What I'm doing now is the paint bled down here, so I just lifted it off a little bit with a damp brush and used my paper towel. So I'm really kind of varying the techniques. I really love the sky in this photograph. It's quite atmospheric. And I'm trying to capture that by using these techniques. Now, there is a danger of overworking as well. I totally get that. But as I said, you can wash off. And I like to have a little play with my sky. And I just thought just using the one colour hopefully will help you and make you feel a little bit more brave, to have a little play. Now, the important thing is don't add wet watery paint into a damp paint because you'll get backruns. So as long as you keep that in mind, it should be pretty safe. And don't overwork it, don't go scrubbing too hard because it will mark the paper as well. Because our brushes are soft, it's kinder to the paper. I added a little bit creamier paint there just to make that little bit of shadow underneath that top cloud. And I'm just lifting off and I'm just having some fun. I've decided to put a cloud on top there, and just to show you that you can take things off and play around. And I'm just softening under this cloud now as well. The shine is still on the paper, so it's safe for me to work. Once that shine goes, you need to stop painting because you will get back runs otherwise, those cauliflowers. So I'm leaving my painting alone now because I noticed my shine was about to go. So I'm wetting all of the pavement. Now, just to say, because that sky is still damp and the way I'm painting, I could easily get droplets of water onto the painting. You may want to let your sky dry because there's a danger that you might get a little bit of water on the sky. So just watch out for that. You have choices. So I'm just wetting all of this pavement area, all of the road, all over their reflections and everything. And I've got a teeny touch of Quinacridone gold here, and I'm putting a little bit back on the back of this lady's coat and just softening with a damp brush. And it's just to give a little bit of colour and light. Her overcoat was that sort of camel colour, but it's also the light that's given by that distant lamp there you can see just above her head, and there's some light cast on Big Ben as well. So I'm just putting a little bit of light here and there where I can see it. And remember that you can, use a bit of artistic license as well. Overexpress yourself. So this is kind of wet on dry, and I'm just softening with a damp brush, and I'm just exaggerating here that lovely glow on Big Ben, but that is the kind of colour that I'll be using as well. So I'm just sort of dropping this in a little bit wet on the pavement area because I've wet all of that area, but the bit on Big Ben is actually dry, but I've just softened. Now what I'm doing now is I'm adding the brown oxide and a little bit of the indigo together. Now it does end up, you've got to be careful because sometimes with indigo it can look at, this is a bit of a bluey indigo, and I found that using that with the brown and definitely with the Quinacridone gold, it goes green. So if you're worried a little bit like that, you might want to swap to a Paynes grey. Paynes grey is a good substitute. And if you don't have obviously the brown oxide, which I don't expect many of you to have, you can use burnt sienna or even burnt umber. Those colours, or Quinacridone rust, another colour I absolutely love by M. Graham. So, a medium brown will be perfect. So I'm painting these reflections, damp into damp. These are the reflections of the people, and I'm just keeping them to a minimum. I just want to get some soft reflections there. I'm using my size 6 brush to do that, and now I've swapped to my larger brush to paint in some more cerulean onto the wet pavement and road. Remember the wet pavement, because it's quite smooth, this pavement, it's very reflective and it's reflecting the sky above. It's like, if you think about it, it's like water, it's like a river. It looks like a very wet day, but obviously they've not got their umbrellas up, so it must have dried off a little bit. But it's quite nice, isn't it? The sun's come out and it's nice and bright, and I'm painting this. It's almost like painting the sky again. So on that bottom left hand corner, I've left a gap for the clouds. I've added a little bit of indigo here, and I'm just painting some sort of damp into damp now with my large brush, just some darker areas, especially in the foreground, and it gives some great depth. So it's not quite the colour of the sky, because I want to give that look of the colour of the pavement as well, which is like a dark grey. And I'm painting a little bit on the road as well, making it a touch lighter because it is further away. And you notice I always give my brush a good rinse, and here I'm just lifting off the white lines. Now I didn't mask them out because I wanted to avoid using masking fluid in this tutorial. I am going to use wax later, so you could use some wax for this as well. The only thing is I thought maybe I won't use wax for that area, just in case your line goes a bit wobbly. It's quite hard to get to, you know, remove the wax without getting an iron and some brown paper out, which is something I've never done, but I know that you can do that to remove wax. I'm actually applying now some of this reflection from the bridge here with my size 6 brush, and it is mostly indigo, and it's a little bit creamier because I want it to kind of not spread as much. I've got a little bit of the brown oxide at the top there, but it's just to kind of, I'm almost painting it again like I would paint reflections in a river. So that's what it looks like. And I'm putting a little bit of this darker colour now, where this lady has got a darker coat. I'm painting that in there. And it's damp into damp, so don't have your brush too wet, otherwise it will move too much. And you want these marks to kind of stay put, but have a soft edge. And that's exactly what I'm doing. And you might be all asking yourself, why are you using this plastic see-through palette? I quite like using something, I mean, that was, you know, I'm just recycling really, but because I was using the plastic card, and it's just sort of accessible. I didn't want to mess up the palettes sort of thing. So I thought I'll use that, but actually you can just use your palettes. Trying to be creative here. It frees me up though. That's the reason why, I think. But I'm just mixing a little bit of the Quinacridone gold here, damp into damp, along the sort of, there's a yellow line there. We have yellow lines in the UK, so you can't park on the bridge. So I'm just painting this damp into damp, and I'm actually putting it where the car lights are as well, the sort of lights coming from that on the road. I'm just putting them on the back of the cars as well. Now don't panic because there's cars, because I'm not going to, and they're so far away, I'm not going to give them too much attention. I will be painting them a little bit, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's an impression. And I'm just putting a few little lights actually in these distant buildings here. So again, in watercolour we work light to dark. So these are all my light areas. I also like to work large to small in watercolour. That's why I've painted the large sky, of course, and this big expanse of pavement and road. I mean, these take up probably 2/3 or 2/3 of the painting. A third is the buildings, Big Ben, and the people. So, you know, we've got most of the underpainting completed already. Now, you don't have to do this. It's just showing you another technique. I think in some ways there might be a bit of a risk, especially if you're starting out in watercolour. So by all means watch, but maybe you don't have to do it, and you can use some white. I'm going to use some white pastels afterwards, so you could use that then. But it's basically to lift out this light, this sort of highlight on the pavement here caused by the wet pavement. So I'm just lifting off. And the danger is, especially if you're starting out, you apply too much liquid to the brush to lift off this damp brush, that you get a background. And I don't want you to get this far and then create a background, but it's just to show you these different techniques. I'm lifting off with a round brush, a bit like I did with the clouds, lifting out and taking off the excess with my paper towel, and then just lifting off. Make sure the brush is clean, so keep rinsing it and repeat. I'm using a bit of the wax there just to sort of keep a little bit of the clock face lighter, the white of the paper. So instead of using masking fluid, I'm using wax. It's not too bad here, and I've actually lifted off a little bit with a kitchen towel because I put too much paint on, but there is a little bit of wax resist there as well to help me. Now, because this part of the Big Ben is kind of darker, I'm not too worried about, obviously the sky went across there, so don't worry about that. But what I'm doing here is I'm going to start using my plastic card. Now you can use any plastic card, any store card, credit cards, bank cards, you know, those sort of ones that you don't need anymore. And I'm wetting the whole of Big Ben around the lamp with my large brush. So it's going to be wet in wet with the card. And I'm going to use paint that's been squeezed straight from the tube. I'm actually using the wax here as well, just to mask, well, wax out the light of these lamps as well, just here and there. I did paint over this lamp here deliberately because obviously it's glass and you can see the sky through it. So that was my reasoning there. So here we are now. I've just got some Quinacridone gold and the brown. I'm going to say brown because you can use any brown. And I'm actually going to paint this, well, print this wet on dry. Now, for some reason, you can see that when I applied the card, the paper had dried so quickly. So I'm just re-wetting it, so no panic there. So if you find that, just you want the paint to spread a little bit, and it hadn't sort of moved at all, that first mark with the card. So in second go, have a little go here. I want it to move. That's better. It's lovely. It just moves. So you're making these marks, but some of them blend. And it creates that magical effect of the marks on Big Ben. You don't have to paint all these lines of the buildings. And I mean, I bet you looked at this and thought it was terrifying to actually paint something like this. But actually, the card just makes it so much easier. So I'm just printing and making these marks. And you can actually cut different sizes of cards to match the marks and the shapes that you need for your painting. I stuck with one card, but you could actually do that. You can use one card for all sorts of shapes and sizes on your painting. And there we are. I'm painting the tip of that card there because I needed a short bit at the top of Big Ben there. So I'm just printing the top bit of the card there. So, and also the side bits, there's a little bit of perspective on the side of Big Ben there, so I'm just painting that in, and I'm using a little bit of the Indigo and a touch of the Cerulean. I've taken a bit of excess off on my paper towel there, it was too wet, and I'm just painting this damp into damp, or actually it was a bit wet into damp I think, but just this sort of steely blue colour. And just painting this sort of, and I want to create sort of a nice sort of dreamlike atmospheric effect, so I'm keeping it all nice and wet in wet. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the buildings on the right here. I'm wetting the paper first. I'm using my size 6 brush, and I'm just sort of taking my time, especially with the chimneys and things like that, and carefully sort of painting around some of those yellow marks that I made in the first stage. And there's some buildings in the distance. Now there was another child on their parents' or shoulders, whoever was carrying them, and I didn't feel that it was right for the composition, so I've actually taken the child and the person out, and I've just replaced them with someone else. There is another little child on this chap's shoulders on the right. I thought that was enough. It was almost too busy, so I've opened up the space a little bit. So I'm just now printing with some Indigo this time and some Cerulean, sort of again wet in wet with my card, so the marks sort of stay and the paint sort of spreads a little bit, but you get these lovely sort of linear marks, which are quite tricky to paint sometimes, wet into wet, because the paint is quite creamy. It sort of stays, but a little bit of it spreads, and it's so effective. I have to say, before I even started this, I didn't think it would be this good. So and the colours, they're just really nice, just these 4 colours to try and create some lovely colour harmony as well in this painting, and it really works well. So I'm just painting a little bit in the distance as well. I want to sort of keep this just not as detailed as the buildings on the right, because they are just that little bit further away, so I'm a little bit of less is more. The only thing I kind of needed on this bridge was one of the Red Rover buses as well. I've from years ago, I've done a couple of lovely Westminster Bridge red bus coming and people in the rain sort of painting. So, but I thought I'd keep that simple, not throw a bus at you as well. But yeah, just using the card, just making little marks. My advice is just less is more. Don't try. You can always go in when it's dry to do a little bit more. So just take your time. So I'm wetting the House of the Parliament now with my size 6 brush. I'm not using a larger brush. I want to have control over what I'm doing. That's why I'm using a slightly smaller brush here, and just wetting up to Big Ben there as well around the people. And now I'm using a little bit, I'm just trying to get a little bit of the right angle of the card there, and a little bit of the brown oxide and the Quinacridone gold. And isn't that magical? It creates texture, lines, shapes, colours, shading. It's all in one. The card does it all. And also those little spires as well. That's really tricky to paint with a brush. And look at it. It's done it for you. It looks like it. I'm just absolutely love this. And I really hope it inspires you to have a go, because it really is magical. I would suggest as well, maybe use your sketchbooks to do this to begin with, just to build up that confidence. So it's quite watery at the bottom here, but that's worked quite well. And look at that. I love that. And I think actually I've got better as I've gone on, because you get that feel of it. And that's why I always say, you know, practice in your sketchbooks. So while that's drying off, I'm going to paint my people. I am going to keep them very, very simple. I'm not going to make them fussy. I'm hardly going to put any detail in, just the shape of them. So the first shape I want, I'm just going to sort of do them in these sort of limited colours as well. So I've got a little bit of indigo, touch of cerulean, this lady here, and she's got, I'm just trying to give a bit of detail to her coat. So I've opened it up at the bottom, so you've got the white of the paper. And I'm just mixing a little bit more indigo there, and I'm just going to give her a skirt or something just to finish off the end there, and then get a little bit of the brown. And my brush has already got a bit of indigo on it, and it's just dark, sort of very thin, almost like triangles coming to a point. Don't paint the feet, just start painting the reflections once the point hits the pavement. So my advice is no neck, no hands, no feet, and no face, you know, features either. And make sure the heads are small with people. That's such a good bit of advice. For little people, that is. You know, really kind of keep it really simple. And you saw her painted in the reflection there using the same colours. So this lady had the sort of lighter coat on. And so I'm painting this wet on dry, again with a size 6, with some Quinacridone gold. I'm adding a little bit of the indigo there, just to put a little bit of dark, like she's wearing a dark skirt or dress or something like that. And then some dark coloured boots. And I'm painting her coat reflection in now, with a little bit of the brown oxide, wet on dry with my size 6 brush. So I'm painting this lady in the middle. I'm not sure if her hair was quite like this, but I like to kind of make them my people. So I kind of sort of embellish a little bit. So I'm going to use the pastels later to add a pop of colour here and there. So I'm painting her sort of jacket. You can see a sort of gap between her arm and her coat there. I'm just using a little bit of the indigo again with the cerulean, using my size 4 brush now, just because of the sort of fiddly details with the arms and things like that. Now keep it, I'm not trying to overcomplicate. Now I'm going to be honest with you, I made her a bit wide. It's my own fault. I misread my own sort of drawing then. I brought her out too wide. Now I'm going to say, don't panic about that. I'll sort that out later. I'll put a dark in here. I'll do something, and it'll be interesting for you to see what happens there. So I've given her some dark coloured trousers, no feet. There's that light going through there, the white light sort of thing, but I've just painted the reflections after it there, and using the similar colours that I painted her with. So on to the next person. This is the person that I invented. So it's a little bit of the indigo this time with some of the brown. So it's just really kind of an arch window. I always say to my students, paint an arch window, sort of a long arch window. Keep it really simple, and you can sort of have an elbow coming out, maybe an arm going down one side, and then those very sort of thin triangles for their legs really, and maybe sometimes have one shorter than the other so they look like they're walking. And then for the reflection part, just using the same colours, but this time just wriggle those lines. Now I would suggest just practice doing that. Don't be scared. I always found my students, that was the bit that scared them most, was those wriggly lines, not sort of filling in the sort of shapes of the coats and trousers and, you know, clothing. So just take your time. And what I would do with the wriggly lines as well, don't go over them, just paint them once, fresh. They'll look great. Even if you think it looks odd, keep it just as long as it's underneath the person. So I'm painting this little child now with some cerulean, because I thought a nice sort of pastel blue colour, and a little bit of dark coloured trousers that look like they're wearing salopettes almost, little bobble hat there, and just a sort of a rust coloured coat here. For, let's assume it's dad, could be tall mum, but yeah, sort of, it's just varying the colours of the people. Take your time with these people, work from left to right or right to left, and just treat everyone, sort of just vary those colours. And the other bit of advice, I read this years ago, is that with their clothing, have either dark trousers or legs or whatever, and light coloured tops, and vice versa. I've actually gone dark, everything there, but most of them are in the photograph, and because it's almost a wet, wintry sort of scene there, I can get away with it a little bit. They're all with their coats on. So I'm painting people in the distance now. So their heads are on about the same level. And this is to do with the 1 point perspective here, that their heads are on around the horizon, or they're on the level where the person who took the photograph is eye level is. So I don't want to get in too much to detail about perspective, but just to say, keep their heads in around the same area. That way they will look like they're going into a 3D space, even though it's only a 2D surface. And it will kind of just, the magic will look right. This artistic tool of perspective will have created this illusion. So I'm just giving this lady here a hat. I forgot to paint her head. And now I'm going to paint the cars, and I'm really just going to give a little bit of a wash here, not paint too much on there. I'm using a little bit of the indigo and a touch of the cerulean, and just making some dark marks here and there, painting in the wheels, painting the dark windows, just keeping it really, really simple. And as you can see here, I'm just painting this. It looks like it's a very big vehicle, this here. It's like a limousine, I think, almost. But I'm using my size 4 brush to paint this. It's all wet on dry, and I'm just painting just like quick marks, and I've just painted a little bit of shadow just underneath the car with a little bit of the cerulean with the indigo, and I've just softened it as well, and it just sort of makes them look like they're on the ground with that shadow. Shadows are so important. And what I'm doing here is I'm wetting the wall here of the bridge, and with my size 6 brush, and I'm going to use the card technique again with some indigo and cerulean, just sort of, you know, creating these little marks here. And it's quite nice to do this wet in wet, because it's quite nice and soft, the edges, and then later on you can actually use it wet on dry, just to create, as I will do with the buildings as well, just to create a little bit more darks and details, really, to bring it to life. And I'm just using now on the right hand side, it's actually dried off a little bit there underneath the cars. I've used a little bit of the card technique there as well, just to really ground them so they don't look like they're floating at all. And I'm just softening this wall here on the left with my damp brush, just to really smooth things out a little bit and to push it back, and to blend those colours a little. Now the painting has dried off, so I'm actually using the card now wet on dry, using a little bit of the brown, and just painting or printing the detail on Big Ben there. You don't have to paint all of the marks, you're just giving a little bit of an impression. I'm doing the same here on the Houses of Parliament, using mostly the brown, but I think there's a little bit of the indigo and other sort of colours in there, you know, the other colours in there as well, just keeping up that variety. And don't worry if all the paint doesn't come off the card onto the paper. Sometimes that's useful because we can actually overdo it, and especially, push my water pot out of the way there, especially with the buildings there, you can, less is more always with watercolour. So I'm just printing that in there. I find I move my water pot because I like to be quite expressive with my hand gestures, especially on the right hand side. I don't want to knock the pot over. I'm just actually painting or printing some of the chimneys there as well. And it becomes almost instinctive when you're doing this. You know, you're kind of almost painting not from memory, because I'm sort of looking at the photograph, but I'm sort of getting into the painting, so I'm interpreting the photograph. I think sometimes copying a photograph, it can end up looking a bit flat because you're painting every little bit of detail. So here, just pick out the details, and I would suggest things that are in the foreground, give them more emphasis, and it's only where your focal point is, and if it's that's in the distance, you can give it a little bit more detail. But sort of things that aren't the focal point, don't give it too much attention. Remember, they're the extras. Give your stars of the show and your supporting cast members more details. I really love the people actually now, more so as it's dried off. They look like they're walking, there's activity, it's busy, a bustling bridge here. So I'm printing here on the top of Big Ben, just creating, just bringing this forward away from the sky as well, and using the edge of the card and just to stipple a few little dots on there to create some details and textures. and I'm painting the people now. Remember, this is all dry. I'm using my size 6 brush and I'm just painting a little bit of shadows here and there. This was the person that I kind of went a little bit wrong, and I've just painted a bit of shadow where her right arm is, given her a skirt. Just those little bits of details kind of pushes her back, doesn't make her look too obvious that I kind of went a little bit wide in the painting of her. And I'm just sort of putting little darks and details just where their arms are, maybe underneath their collar, where, you know, maybe their skirt or underneath the coat, just little dark marks here and there. It really is just those little bits that are just all you need. And I'm just softening her arm area here as well, just to push that back. The lady in the centre, putting a little bit more dark on this person's head, a few little dark marks in the distance, not too much. Remember, they're the extras. And it's really just, it's enough. You know, you don't need to do too much. I love painting people. It really does bring life to a painting sometimes, especially a street scene. And I've just put a little bit on the little child's hat there, and I've decided to put some details on the bridge with my brush. I couldn't paint sort of curvy things with the card there, but that's enough really to lead your eye into the picture. So I'm just painting that sort of in the foreground. And now I'm painting the clock face on Big Ben. It's always difficult to decide what time you want it at, so I think I've decided it looks like 9:30 there, or 6:15. You decide what time you want. I'm just painting a little bit of detail as well here with my brush, and just a little touch at the top there as well. I'm painting this lantern here and a little bit of the Houses of Parliament as well. I'm actually just diluting some of the marks made by the card, softening them a little bit, and it sort of makes them look more solid as well. So I've wet the lamp here on the bridge, and I'm dropping in some Quinacridone gold, and now I'm using a little bit of the indigo and some of the brown here, and I'm just printing with that onto the lamps themselves where you've got those really sort of dark edges. And it is sort of wet into wet, but it's quite creamy, the paint, so it sort of stays there. And it kind of brings this forward now, away from the background to create depth. I can't believe I'm actually painting this with just a plastic card. It's amazing. And just printing now the edge here with some really creamy indigo and a little bit of the brown there, and using the tip of the card again to paint in the details. It's amazing. I love it. I really do. I haven't actually done anything as detailed as this. I usually do it a little bit more abstract. So it's quite nice to do something like this that's got a little bit more realism. Quite interesting. So I hope this encourages you to have a go, especially at complicated sort of buildings and, you know, architectural details. Just finishing off here, this lamp post here, just creating a little bit more edge. There's quite a lot of detail at the bottom, and I've decided not to paint all of that in. I'm keeping it a little bit simple, and just, you know, not taking the attention away from the people or Big Ben, but painting or printing enough detail there that it draws the street light lantern away from the House of Parliament, thus creating depth in your painting. I'm using the card now for the reflection of the people, and also in between them it unifies the mark making that I'm sort of printing on the painting. I'm putting a little bit more onto Big Ben as well, just to give it a little bit more details there, using a bit of the brown oxide. And I decided to paint this lady as well, just to put her face a little bit in shadow, painting a little bit on the top of Big Ben here. I felt that it was fading back into the sky, So I've used a mixture of the Indigo and the Cerulean. So it's a medium to darkish tone and it brings it forward. And I'm using my size 4 brush to paint in the very small details. I've used a mixture of the Indigo and some of the brown here. I'm using my size 4 brush, painting wet on dry and then softening, and it creates more solidity in the bridge wall here. And I'm just painting a little bit of the reflection as well, wet on dry, with a mixture of the Indigo and the brown Oxide. And I just thought I'd show you a close-up here. I'm using my size 4 brush and really just wriggling. Try just to paint once if you can. I would advise you to have a practice of it as well. But it's just like this open-ended sort of painting, and there's a little bit of movement in it as well. And it creates depth, and I'm putting some more shadow underneath the cars. My lamp has dried here, so I'm painting wet on dry with my size 4 brush, a mixture of the Indigo. I'm almost kind of drawing with the brush, keeping the marks really loose. You can use your plastic card to do this as well if you would like. Painting a little bit of detail at the bottom, some more marks on the bridge there. So it's getting towards the end of the painting where I'm painting in darks and details. I've got a very dilute mixture of the Indigo here, painting some shadow on the right hand side of Big Ben here. It's just a very sort of thin line there. You can't really see that side of the building, but it makes it look more 3D. So I've mixed up a little bit more of the Indigo. I'm painting some details now on this car here on the right hand side, some more shadows in the windows, and the car just in front of it here, it's got the impression of a white car, and it's really come to life. It almost looks like a Volkswagen Beetle or something like that. And I'm just painting a little bit on the car in front of it. It's a yellow vehicle. It's so small, just put a few little marks there, not too much. It just creates the impression. So I would, anything sort of a bit complicated like this, but in the distance, don't give it too much detail because you're almost drawing attention to it. So just a few little marks on the wheels, in the windows, just softening here as well, using mostly the Indigo for a bit of shadow. And I'm softening here Big Ben as well, just using the paint that's on the building here, reawakening it, the dried paint, and just softening a little, and it makes it look more solid. And I'm just added a little bit of Paynes grey as well to the markings here, just these marks here and there just to finish off. And the painting has dried now. I've squeezed out a little bit of gouache onto my table surface there. Don't worry, this is a board, a large board I'm using, and the wood effect is sticky back plastic, so it wipes off really easily. And I'm just printing this white gouache to give some light, but also just to sharpen up edges as well on the buildings, on Big Ben. It's just to give it some details. And it really does, especially if your painting looks a bit flat, it sort of lifts it slightly. And I've deliberately not used any masking fluid here, so the white kind of brings it to life. And as I said earlier, that sort of streak of light underneath the feet of the people there, you can use your white gouache. And if you don't have the white gouache, you could use white watercolour or even white acrylic. And I am going to be using the pastels later, so you could even use some white pastels. However, you don't need to use any white, especially if you've lifted off previously and your painting is really light there. So don't worry. The lovely thing about this style of painting is it allows you a lot of flexibility, lots of freedom and creativity. I'm just painting some white on the clock face of Big Ben there, and a few little dashes of light in the lamps in the distance, as well as the one in the foreground. I'm also using a bit of yellow pastels now in the lanterns, just to kind of give some yellow light. I'm using some orange pastel as well, just for lights in the distance here and there, and it just adds some warmth. I didn't want to change the colours too much with the pastels. I'm sort of sticking to the colours that I have, but if you want to change it, go for it. Especially on the people, you might want to give them some accessories, some red scarf or something like that. I'm using white pastel as well. I said that earlier. You can use that to lighten up places. I'm using it for the road markings and some of the yellows for the yellow lines here on Westminster Bridge. And it's quite nice, it's quite creative. Just be careful that you don't use too much, because it can be very tempting and you end up with a pastel painting. Giving this lady an orange scarf there, I quite like that, but I'm just toning it back a little bit with a touch of yellow as well, using a very pale green on the bottom of the lamp here, and using some white on the surface of the pavement here just to give a little bit of sparkle. You don't need to, but I just thought it'd be quite nice to show you that as well. I'm using the side of the pastel, and I've used a little bit of paper towel there to soften some of the marks as well, and just damp these ones in the distance if they're coming forward too much. And you can use your fingertips as well to blend. And here is the finished painting. I've removed the framing tape to reveal a lovely white border, which may help you to decide if you needed to make any more changes as well. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and the method of painting buildings using a plastic card. Hope it inspires you to get your paints out and your plastic cards, of course. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please put them in the comments section below, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you all for supporting me on the memberships. I really appreciate it. And remember to share your work on the members Facebook page. Details about that can be found in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.